hysteroscopy, what the evidence says. Sir, waiting for your point of view on this.
Yeah.
Till the time sir is opening up things, I will share my experience. We did one hysteroscopy workshop with Osama Soki, and I called all my IVF failure patients. And 20 patients had come, not a single patient, the report was normal. So that compelled me to make a decision myself that any time any patient is going for IVF, hysteroscopy is must. Not a single patient.
Yes, ma'am.
It was normal.
Ma'am, we did 2 workshops with Osama sir in the 2 years, consecutive 2 years. And it was wonderful. And we also concluded in a way, when we are going for that much expensive treatment and going through all those IVF treatment, better is to do hysteroscopy. It's just a
Yes.
5-minute job.
So I have taken a very conscious decision. I don't go by evidence. My evidence is good enough.
Can you see the slides, ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Beautiful.
Can I start?
Yes, visible. Yes,
Yes,
sir. We can
please.
start. We can start.
Okay.
सर ये हाइट को भी जरा कर लीजिए तो ये स्टॉप आ जाएगा. हाइट को भी जरा सा टिक कर लीजिए.
Oh, just hold on.
खाली हाइट को.
हाइट को टिक करना.
That's it, done.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. As madam said, we are getting more and more, into pre-IVF hysteroscopy, especially when, office hysteroscopy has become possible with the thinner scopes. And with the result, we may find some abnormalities which normally we may miss on a normal ultrasonography. Now, what does the literature has to say? Whether we should do for all our patients, or we should be selective, or we should have a combined approach, one-stop approach, so that we can give best to the patient in a cost-effective manner. So the question is, why should we evaluate the cavity pre-IVF? Definitely, because the pregnancy rate has to be increased, and there are some pathologies in the uterine cavity like polyps, fibroids, adhesions, which may impact the pregnancy rate. Then we must know what are the various methods to evaluate the cavity, and then we should compare which one is better than the other one. Then what are the indications of hysteroscopy, whether in the first IVF only we do it, or whether we should do in a repeated IVF failures or implantation failures, and what is the impact of hysteroscopy in the final outcome, that is the pregnancy. If we see the average IVF success rate in India, it varies with the age, and it can be as low as 2% in women more than 45 with the self eggs, and less than 35 is 42%. So any condition which would further decrease the chances of pregnancy, it is very disheartening for the patient as well as to the clinicians. We want to know whether the endometrium is friendly or hostile. It has been found that the uterine factors contribute 2 to 3% in the couples who are struggling to conceive. And in cases of unexplained infertility, 10 to 15% of cases may have some abnormalities in the uterine cavity, which we may miss otherwise. So it is important as a first step in evaluation of the assessment of the uterus and the integrity of the uterine cavity. There are some anatomical malformation of the uterus, which could be either congenital, like subtate or a septate uterus, bicornate uterus, or acquired like uterine fibroids, especially the submucous type, endometrial polyps, intrauterine adhesions, and hydrosalpinx, which may interfere with the normal implantation. So whenever possible, intrauterine abnormality should be corrected before IVF. And as I said earlier also, in a primary cases of the patient, like prevalence of one or more intrauterine abnormalities in asymptomatic women undergoing office cystoscopy prior to IVF, the incidence is around 11%. However, it can be as high as 50% in patients who are having a recurrent implantation failure. The commonest ones are the polyps, the myomas, submucous one, the adhesions, septum, or some patients may have more than one abnormality also. However, 87.9% may have no abnormality. So this fact necessitates accurate evaluation of uterus before proceeding to ART. The transvaginal ultrasonography is the first mode of investigation, followed by sonohysterogram, where you instill saline into the uterine cavity to see for any adhesions or a polyp, or HSC, which also helps in assessment of the tubes, and finally the histoscopy are the most commonly used methods for this purpose of evaluation of uterine cavity. Now, if we compare these modalities, what do we find? HSC versus histoscopy. HSC is a safe and a simple technique for indirect evaluation of not only uterine cavity, but also the fallopian tube. Generally, histoscopy is used as an adjunct to one or more of the other rather than a basal investigation. That means we do HSC, we may find any evidence of adhesions or a polyp or suspicion of some subseptate uterus or septate uterus. That is the time we may resort to the histoscopy as a second line of investigation after HSC. HSC provides direct visualization of uterine cavity together with the cervical canal and permits therapeutic intervention if necessary without causing any remarkable patient discomfort. The accuracy of HSC, however, it is quite disappointing. The sensitivity and specificity are described to be 79 to 98 and 15 to 82% respectively. The pathologies which are normally missed by HSC are small endometrial polyps, submucous myomas, small adhesions, or some uterine septums or a subseptum. But when we have a 2D or a 3D ultrasonography, and if we are doing it regularly, we can find out or detect these abnormalities easily if you are doing ultrasound routinely yourself. But if you are dependent on others to do it for you, that is a time, there can be some missing of these abnormalities. So Asherman syndrome, where the adhesions are there, can very easily be seen after the installation of saline into the uterine cavity. You can see the bands across the uterine cavity. Once we compare the ultrasonography with the histoscopy, though histoscopy is considered the gold standard, the sensitivity, specificity, positive and the negative predictive value of TVS in detecting cavity abnormalities were all reported to be between 81 to 100%. That means almost 20% of times you may miss an abnormality if you are only dependent on transvaginal sonography. And intrauterine adhesions, especially the smaller ones, may be the most difficult to diagnose at a routine ultrasonography. So in fact, uterine subseptum seems to be overdiagnosed, especially if you are a beginner in histoscopy and you do not inflate the uterine cavity with the adequate amount of saline. So you may tend to miss or overdiagnose subseptum in these cases. Saline infusion sonography is one of the very easily doneable procedure in the OPD, where you can delineate after normal ultrasonography if you suspect a polyp or adhesion. You can instill saline, and once uterine walls are separated, you can see the polyps and the adhesions very clearly. Wherever facilities are available, SIS together with the 3D ultrasound can offer a less invasive outpatient method to assess the uterine cavity with accuracy similar to that of hysteroscopy. So in a smaller units where they do not have a hysteroscopy, so there in those cases, possibly doing saline infusion sonography along with the 3D ultrasound if it is present, one can diagnose intrauterine pathologies easily. So the saline infusion sonography, when it was compared with the hysteroscopy, so what were the results? That the woman with unexplained infertility should be screened for possible uterine cavity abnormalities. So, and SIS is a simple and a well-tolerated procedure that can be used as an alternative technique for evaluation of a uterine cavity abnormalities when hysteroscopy is not available. However, hysteroscopy is still considered the gold standard to diagnose intrauterine pathology as it is more sensitive and more accurate than saline infusion sonography. To cut the story short, and where you are working, that is most important, and how efficient you are in the procedures. If you are good at ultrasonography and if you can do the SIS, one can do that as the first line of investigation. And if you find an abnormality, then one can do the hysteroscopy subsequently. As per the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, hysteroscopy is a definitive method for the diagnosis and treatment of intrauterine pathology. Though it is costly and invasive method, it should be reserved for further evaluation and treatment of abnormalities defined by less invasive methods such as HSC and sonohistography. So the debate would go on that whether we should be doing hysteroscopy as a routine procedure during an investigation of an infertile couple. Because many of the patients may think the doctor is possibly pushing us into this investigation for making more money. However, this controversy would remain. The position of hysteroscopy in the management of infertile females would be debated at various forums, because whether the pathologies which are detected by hysteroscopy, whether they contribute to the infertility to that extent, or whether there is an improvement after hysteroscopy, again, there are a lot of questions to that. The varieties of studies demonstrate that the procedure is well tolerated otherwise and effective in treatment of intrauterine pathology. However, there is no consensus on the effectiveness of hysteroscopic surgery in improving the prognosis of subfertile women. That means if there's a small polyp or a small adhesion, even if you have done the hysteroscopic surgery, whether that is going to improve the prognosis of these patients, that also is not totally confirmed. So what do the guidelines say? The value of routine hysteroscopy prior to IVF, currently there is no conclusive evidence of its benefit. The NICE guidelines suggest that the woman should not be offered hysteroscopy on its own as part of the initial investigation for infertility unless clinically indicated. The European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology guidelines for infertility investigation suggest hysteroscopy could be useful for confirmation and treatment of suspected uterine pathology. That means you have already done the TVS or SIS, you have suspected some pathology, then it may be useful. Now, as Dr. Shada Jain Madam had said initially, should we go by the European guidelines? Because there it is the national insurance organizations who are paying for it. And in India, the patient is paying the amount of money for the IVF. So with this small additional cost, if the patient feels that this can increase in the pregnancy rate, possibly we may have to sideline these guidelines and make our own decisions whether we should be doing hysteroscopy as a first IVF cycle also, or only in a failed IVF cycle. So routine hysteroscopy, there's an INSIGHT trial where the routine hysteroscopy, they showed does not improve the live birth rates in fertile women with the normal TVS of the uterine cavity, which is scheduled for the first IVF. And a woman with a normal transvaginal ultrasound should not be offered routine cystoscopy. That means if you are doing the IVF for the first time, then if ultrasound TVS has shown no abnormality, one may avoid it. Another, the Dolly et al., they said that in patients that did undergo pre-IVF histoscopy, the pregnancy rate was improved 38% compared with 18% in patients without histoscopy. So there is a, another, author who would say that yes, it should be done for all the patients because you are improving the pregnancy rate almost double after doing histoscopy in a primary IVF cycle also. There's a systemic review and a meta-analysis, and the gist of that analysis is that histoscopy in asymptomatic women prior to their first IVF cycle was found to be associated with improved chance of achieving pregnancy and live birth rate when performed just before commencing the IVF cycle. Now that is the catch. We are doing it just before commencing the IVF cycle. So maybe there is something hidden in that line, because when we are doing histoscopy just before the IVF cycle, maybe some amount of scratching has taken place that has improved the pregnancy rate, or because when you are doing histoscopy, the saline, normally you add some antibiotics like gentamicin, etc., and that is washing away any bacterial colonies which are there in the uterine cavity, which would have otherwise hampered the fertility. So that has to be reconfirmed. But however, the procedure is safe and larger studies are still required to confirm these findings. But however, in the patients with the repeated IVF ICSI-ET failures, definitely after histoscopy and subsequent IVF ICSI-ET cycle, using standard long protocol, pregnancy rates were significantly higher compared with the previous repeated IVF ICSI attempts, 35.8% versus 0%. Evaluation of endometrial integrity by histoscopy in patients with repeated IVF ICSI failure before entering any other fertilization procedure is almost a must now. If you are not done in the previous to the first IVF, so when you are attempting after a failure and doing FET, or you are doing a repeat IVF cycle, then it is worthwhile to reassess the cavity by histoscopy. Again, these are two randomized controlled trials which reported exceptional improvement of pregnancy rate after histoscopy screening and instant treatment of detected pathology in patients after at least 2 failed IVF attempts. Intervention resulted in a 9 to 13% increase in the clinical pregnancy rate after subsequent IVF cycle. So that means again, in a repeated IVF cycle, this randomized study also says that it should better to do histoscopy before the repeat IVF. Now with this small, thin trophy histoscopes, a multicentric randomized control study trial was done, where outpatient histoscopy before IVF in patients with a normal ultrasound uterine cavity and a history of unsuccessful IVF treatment cycle, they said it does not improve the live birth rate. And they also said that further research into effectiveness of surgical correction of specific uterine cavity abnormalities before IVF is warranted. Again, what they want to convey is that maybe the small polyps, maybe the small adhesion, whether removing them, does it help in the pregnancy rate? Still, it is uncertain. This study has now found such benefit to be less than previously suggested. And the first result showed that some abnormality of the uterine cavity was found in 11% of the patients having histoscopy. However, in this second outcomes results from following IVF showed no significant difference between the two group. Live birth rate per patients of 31% in the histoscopy group and 29% in the control group. Possibly because this histoscope, which is very thin, whether it's a Schottky histoscope or a Karl Stoll's trophy histoscope, we were this group of where the study was done, they were doing it routinely for all the patients, and because of that, they did not find any much improvement in the histoscopy group versus the non-histoscopy group. Chow et al. Again, they studied six eligible studies comprising more than 4,000 patients with recurrent implantation failure. And what they found was, the last line, if you read it, histoscopy may potentially improve pregnancy outcomes in patients with recurrent implantation failure. So, having said that, so we come to the conclusion that, as Fatima et al. Also said, that in all 38% of the study population had abnormal histoscopy finding, and 22.2% of the women with abnormal histoscopy finding showed a significant increase in the clinical pregnancy rate in subsequent IVF cycle. So what does that mean? That means 38% had abnormalities, which were corrected, but all the 38% did not show the improvement. Out of that, the 22% of the patients who had histoscopic abnormalities, when they were corrected, they showed an increase in the clinical pregnancy rate. The only catch again is they did not mention which were the patients and what were the findings in these 22.2% of the patients who benefited by doing the histoscopy. So the women with the repeated implantation failure after IVF have a remarkably high possibility of achieving pregnancy after histoscopy evaluation and management of endometrial cavity pathologies. So another, randomized controlled trial by Hosham et al., Shockey, they did it. The incidence of pathological abnormalities based on histoscopy diagnosis was high, especially with the repeated IVF failures. The improvement in implantation and the clinical pregnancy rate were observed after office histoscopy prior to IVF fixing. So routine office histoscopy should be an essential step of infertility workup before ART, even in patients with a normal HSG and a TVS. So that means we have a divergent views. First is whether we should be doing histoscopy in all our patients, whether it is IVF, first IVF or a repeat IVF or after implantation failure, or whether we should be doing histoscopy, only when there is a normal HSG or TVS, or even when it is a normal HSG and TVS. But one thing is sure, that endometrial injury, helps in improving the implantation rate in the patients of recurrent implantation failure. The pregnancy rates being twice as high with the biopsy scratch, group of patients as opposed to simple histoscopy. So that means if you are doing histoscopy, even if you don't find anything in the uterine cavity, at least do sketching along with it, which will increase the pregnancy rate. And after that, the IVF or the FET cycle should be attempted as early as possible. So there was another study, we suggested that in women with the recurrent implantation failure, inducing local injury to the womb lining, the cycle prior to starting the ovarian stimulation for IVF can improve the pregnancy outcome. But however, there are two main problems which go against the histoscopy. One, it is an invasive procedure, and secondly, there is still an ongoing debate about the real significance of those small observed intrauterine pathologies on fertility. So what should we do? So the best option would be we should have one-stop uterine diagnosis and treatment. So with the new generation of instruments, it is possible today to perform one-stop diagnosis in a most comfortable and accurate way without the necessity to use speculum or analgesia. So you do ultrasound, you do histoscopy, you do contrast sonography, and even histoscopic or ultrasound-guided endometrial tissue sampling can be performed. So this one-stop approach provides with high patient compliance, all necessary information to make an accurate diagnosis and to plan the correct therapeutic approach to these patients. So in this one-stop uterine diagnosis, it starts with the transvaginal ultrasound first, followed by fluid trophy histoscopy. Trophy is a brand of Karl-Stoss hysteroscope using the vagino-cervical atraumatic approach, for which no speculum, tenaculum, or a cervical preparation is used. No analgesia or anesthesia is necessary. And immediately after the hysteroscopy, a second transvaginal ultrasonography is performed, taking advantage of the intrauterine fluid for a contrast image of the uterus. So combining all these modalities together in one sitting can help the patient better with the new, high resolution ultrasounds and very small, thin, pliable hysteroscopes which are available today. Basically, the indications would remain if we have a cervical canal problems like stenosis or false passages. You can, see those false passages and then you can make a note of that, so that during the embryo transfer you do not enter into the false passage and do the transfer at a wrong place. Or whenever there is a suspicion of any anatomical defect by TVS or HSC, or suspicion of any intrauterine pathology or endometrial pathology, and also when you are planning to do the scratching, or you want to do the second look hysteroscopy after the previous surgery, so that you want to know how much is the scarring and what is the impact of your previous surgery, whether the uterine cavity is still conducive for implantation or not. So there are some new applications of hysteroscopy before IVF. There are some patients who have had various abdominal surgeries and the complications of those surgeries, and nobody would like to enter into their abdomen to do the delinking of their hydrosalpinx, because already, because of some reasons, there had been complications previously, and one would be worried about the bowel injury again. So what to do and how to block those hydrosalpinges? So one can do hysteroscopic tubal occlusion in these difficult cases, and there are three modalities for that. One is the eSure, the second is the Ediana, which are not available in India, but however rollerball coagulation of the peritubal bulge, that is the ostia, can be tried, which we have done, in some cases in our center. eSure is a coiled spring device that is inserted through the uterine cavity into the tubal openings using a hysteroscope, which is done as an office procedure. These micro insert consist of a stainless steel inner coil and a super elastic outer coil and a polyethylene fibers wound in and around the inner coil. So when released, the outer coil expands to anchor the micro insert in the fallopian tube. As the device expands to fill the tubal opening, it gradually becomes scarred in place and forms a barrier. And this implant gets stuck over there permanently. So with that, if you want to reconfirm, before the embryo transfer, you can do the HSC again. See that your dye does not go into the hydrosalpinx. The procedure is over. So you can, do the transfer. However, what will be the impact on the pregnancy in these cases? Long, and the larger studies are required for that. Another is the Edena, which is another, hysteroscopic sterilization procedure, where they use radio frequency energy and a polymer microinsert that together result in the tubal blockage in the interstitial segment of the fallopian tube. With the Edena procedure, a catheter is positioned immediately inside the opening of the patient's fallopian tube using a hysteroscope, and the catheter applies low-level radiofrequency energy to remove thin layer of cells that line about a 1 centimeter section of the inside of the fallopian tube. A small polymer matrix implant that is smaller than a grain of rice is then inserted into the tubal opening. As the scar tissue grows into the implant, the tubal blockage occurs. And this again can be confirmed by HSC, and one can do the embryo transfer subsequently. Finally, the rollerball occlusion of tubal ostia, which, in difficult cases, we can do it. There is a feasibility of a hysteroscopic tubal occlusion of functionalist hydrosalpinx in cases with acceptable efficacy. It has the advantage of adding a valuable evaluation of endometrial cavity prior to IVF ICSI. It should be an option for treatment protocol in cases of difficult, hydrosalpinges, and further large sample size studies are required to test its impact on the implantation rate and the clinical outcome. Some of the authors, they did the histoscopy, after 1 or 2 months of this roller ball occlusion to see the amount of scarring and confirm that the tubes are blocked. And they found there was a minimal effect as such, and the tubes were blocked. And they did the embryo transfer after that. But however, again, we need to have more data to prove its efficacy. So finally, whatever evidence we have, it all depends on our individual clinical expertise, how good or bad I am in ultrasonography, doing the HSC. Again, word of caution to my young colleagues, please do histoscopy as painless as possible to the patient, because many times the pain can cause spasm, especially in the proximal part of the fallopian tube, and you may get a wrong report. And the patient will not, be very happy with the pain. So in our center, generally we do it under anesthesia only. And the patient's values and expectations, and what is the best external evidence which is available. So having said that, the take-home message is that routine histoscopy in unexplained subfertility at present is questionable. However, routine histoscopy before first IVF is yet to be justified. And after failed IVF, definitely histoscopy is beneficial. Intrauterine pathology should be addressed by histoscopic diagnosis and treatment, and histoscopic surgery increases chance of pregnancy and live birth spontaneously after IVF. Now, whatever data, what we have discussed and whatever we have done, again, this is data from foreign lands. They have their own problems. There the insurance is paying. Again, I'm coming to that. And in our country, it is the patient who is paying. So with slight increase in the cost, if we can increase the pregnancy rate while doing the histoscopy and also scratching along with that before the IVF, definitely it will be welcomed by the patient also. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Very much, sir.
I would like to add 2 comments in that.
Sir.
One thing is, when you analyze the scientific data, there are more meta-analysis than actual work. That is one thing. Because one of the first publications we did it was in 2005, which you showed it in the slide number 8 or 9, which was published in the Human Reproduction Update.
Yes.
All other publications are meta-analysis or giving a different name. Then the second thing is, one surprising thing is, all of them arise from UK, not around the world. That is another surprising fact.
That is what I mentioned. There the situations are different.
No. Actually, it's sorry, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, where the insurance is dictating you to do the things, and or insurance is paying for your treatment. Your choice of investigations and the treatment would be different. Or where the patient is paying, like in India, if the patient, most of them prefer to have twins. They say, okay, in one cost only we can have, while it will be no in the Europe and England.
Not that way, sir. Actually, when you compare all the authors who did the meta-analysis from UK, they're all part of one group spread over a decade.
Yeah. See, if
they all come from only 2 units, and each of them, in the last 15 years, every 5 years, they come with a meta-analysis of histoscopy with a different name. But none of those group members have published any original work on histoscopy.
Yeah,
that is a surprising fact.
Yeah, that is the catch.
And when they send the questionnaires, because all of those groups have sent me the questionnaires because of the 2005 study. And at the end of 17 years, how do I remember the data, the questions they ask me? And my data will be very limited if somebody published in Kamath and Sesh Kamal, other group published 2 years back or 3 years back. They asked me about 2005 data. Then whatever I have will be from the publication data and few data from the Excel tables I have. And then when they include it, it's again a biased study because of two things. The light has changed. At the time it was halogen light, now it's xenon light. The optics have changed. The camera systems have changed. But you are not comparing equals in those studies. Now when I use a high definition camera, I am able to make micropolyposis, whereas at a given set of pressure of 100 millimeters of intrauterine pressure, but none of them speak about the intrauterine pressure at which you set it so that you get the finer pathology. Then none of them describe the vascular pattern of the endometrium when they looked at the hysteroscopy. They say whether the cavity is abnormal or not, whether polyps are there, synechiae are there, but they don't speak about any strawberry appearance and any other information. Those are some of the catches I find. And the third thing is, most of these hysteroscopies are done by the senior registrar, not by the actual consultant who's doing it. And they don't maintain the visual record of the whole thing when they analyze the data. Whatever the senior registrar is writing, they take it at face value, which will be accurate 90%, but it's not 100% precision. Those are some of the catches I find in the hysteroscopic publications that are coming in.
So what is your opinion, sir?
I routinely do a hysteroscopy for every IVF patient, but I do it once. The second thing is, I do it just before the stimulation when my endometrium is thinner. If it is an antagon cycle, I would like to do it in the follicular phase. If it is an agonistic cycle, I do it 1 day before the stimulation. The second thing is, I routinely use glycine because of the visibility, even though saline is cheaper. And I also make sure my pressure is not 100 millimeters so that I get a fluffy appearance of the endometrium much more better. Then I also, if I do it on my allocolligarith, every video recorded is recorded. And then we go back and look at the vascular architecture that is there in the vessels. Sometimes you see the vasculature in the fundus only. Sometimes if there is a suboptimal, doubtful adenomyosis, you see the vascular pattern on the posterior or anterior wall depending on the location. That is never documented in any of these hysteroscopic studies. The fourth and the last thing is, none of them describe the size of the cavity. In the normal cavity, you also have a huge variation. So these are all the biased information. And the other thing is, I feel, because I also do 3D ultrasound, but the 3D ultrasound also depends on who is doing the 3D ultrasound. And what type of machine and at what resolution they acquired the volume, whether they acquired the volume in high resolution or low resolution. In low resolution, the acquisition happens very fast. When you put it at high resolution, you take little more time in the acquisition of the PD volumes. So there again, the main consultant may not be doing that work. So these are some of the pitfalls that are there, and I believe the routine hysteroscopy has a role, and it will increase as our understanding of uterine microbiome increases in future. The second area is if the gap between the first cycle and the subsequent cycle is 2 years or more, and if I have even the slightest doubt, I repeat the hysteroscopy. So these are the information I feel.
Thank you very much, sir.
I might be right, but this is what I.
No, I agree with you because there is so much to see inside the uterine cavity, and you change the pressures and see how the uterus is collapsing back and how it is expanding again, and the vascularity, as you mentioned, how easily it comes back, when you decrease the pressure and then increase the pressure, how blanching effect takes place. There's so many
Yes,
things
sir.
which can be seen by a senior person. So hysteroscopy should not be left, as you said, or at least it should be documented, so that anybody, the senior, when they're trying to make the reports out of that, so they would know exactly what they have seen it and then what is the impact of that. Now, another question is, what about endometrial biopsy for PCR tuberculosis? That is another question, which there in the mind of many people. What is your opinion about that?
We don't do routinely endometrial tuberculosis, but of late we started doing the infection panel, which contains HPV, HSV, uroplasma, mycoplasma, then tuberculosis, trichomonas, and to our surprise, we are finding more HPV. And the second surprise we are finding is a higher incidence of uroplasma and mycoplasma.
You do this cultures in your lab, or so you send it outside?
No, we do it in-house. We do it only by PCR.
Okay. Although this mycoplasma and all,
All this there's a 7-test panel.
Okay.
Where you can run all the panel with PCR.
Okay.
And in the HPV, we do 18 subtypes. And to our surprise, HPV subtype 18 and 53 are seen quite often. And then we cut a sorry face of not knowing what to answer them and what type of follow-up they need, because the information is not there outside.
Correct. What is the incidence of tuberculosis in your new workup?
Very, very low, madam.
Okay.
Because I'm generally the 10th doctor by the time all those are screened, treated. So my statistics may not be the true perspective, but when I talk about infection screen, when nobody is doing that, I'm picking them up. And the other area where I'm picking up the HPV is if a woman has many cycles of donor insemination in many centers, I insist this viral screen should be done before I do my first donor insemination.
How do you treat them?
I don't have a treatment, madam, but
that's right.
basically, when both the partners are HPV positive, the reproductive outcome, the pregnancy loss, and the incidence of preterm delivery around 20 weeks to 25 weeks is very, very high. At least there I can counsel them 2 things. I would like to treat them even if it's a single pregnancy as a high-risk pregnancy. And I would like them to put on constant surveillance of cervical assessment of the possible changes. But I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but that's what I'm doing it.
Good. Ajit, thank you very much. I think we should go on to the second presentation.